back on the Zero Hour. I'm your host, Richard RJ Eskow. As the nation recovers from the political earthquake that is the release of the draft Alito opinion on reproductive rights, I'm very pleased to have my next guest with us. She is Kathryn Kolbert. That's Kolbert, is a very distinguished organizer, attorney, and author. She has appeared before the Supreme Court on this issue, arguing Planned Parenthood versus Casey, which has been credited with saving Roe versus Wade, at least for a period of time, and against what was called one of the most audacious litigation strategies in Supreme Court history, I suppose, up to now. She'll tell us. She's also the co-author of the book, Controlling Women, What We Must Do Now to Save Reproductive Freedom. And Kathryn Kolbert, first of all, thank you for coming on the program.
Happy to be here.
And I guess I would start with this. First of all, I want to go fairly quickly to what we must do now. But in terms of background, in terms of the release of the draft opinion, did it surprise you that in anything, in its tone and its content, or was it more or less what you feared and expected?
Well, I expected the result. That is, I was clear that this court, there were 5 justices on this very ultra-conservative court, to reverse Roe and Casey. So that result was not a surprise. But I have to tell you, I was surprised by the language in the opinion, by its vehemence, by its tracking of anti-abortion language that comes straight out of the movement. It read to me more as a political document than I expected. Years ago, in 1992, when I argued Casey, there were 5 votes to overturn Roe. And Chief Justice Rehnquist at the time wrote a draft opinion. It was never published because Justice Kennedy switched his vote at the last minute and joined O'Connor and Souter in what became the joint opinion in Casey. But the way that Chief Justice Rehnquist framed the argument was much, much different than here. This particular court, the Alito court, is throwing out all notions of stare decisis that have been operative for decades. And he opens the door to the kind of wholesale change in the whole doctrine of substantive due process. And that means that not just abortion is in the crosshairs, a whole range of other rights which are not explicitly in the Constitution because they're inferred from the meaning of liberty, which is explicitly in the Constitution. But a whole host of other rights are in jeopardy as well. And that surprises me.
And I must say, as a non-lawyer, I was certainly surprised by the vehemence and the intensity and the implicit radicalism of it. So, I mean, one of my first thoughts that came up was that it struck me as if, once again, the rights of women, which are not, I feel, broadly understood by our society, are the cutting edge of an assault on rights we've built up in general. Am I reading too much into this? Because it seems to me that not only is this an assault on the bodily integrity and autonomy of women and people capable of giving birth, whoever capable of giving birth, it is also a signal of a dire signal of what may be yet to come. Am I reading too much into it?
No, I don't think you are at all. The court does 2 things. The first thing it does is it says, and this is again a draft opinion with that caveat in mind, although I don't expect it to change much, but the Alito opinion does 2 things. One, it says that the right to choose abortion is not explicitly in the Constitution. There's no mention of abortion. Well, that's true for a whole host of rights. I mean, contraception isn't in the Constitution. Gay marriage isn't in the Constitution. Interracial marriage, the right to travel, things that people have relied upon for generations are not explicitly in the Constitution. And if you know, even if you go to the right talking points, you know, the right to carry a gun and use it in their home is not in the Constitution. There's a phrase about militias, but nothing about individual rights to carry a gun. So I don't think that explicit language of things that didn't exist at the time the Constitution was adopted or amended are really the linchpin of the meaning of this document. It cannot be. Because if we had to go back to when the Constitution was adopted, women were not considered citizens. We didn't have the right to vote. We didn't even have the right to own property. We belonged to our husbands. Now, I don't think most Americans want to return women to that state. But if the barrier is it has to be explicitly mentioned in the Constitution, we're in trouble. But there's a second piece to this, and what the court is, there's actually two more pieces. What the court is saying first is that in addition to, in trying to determine what does liberty and equality mean, we're going to look to whether or not there is a long history of support for those rights in our country. Well, the reality is, again, a whole host of rights have been the subject of discrimination, have been targeted for abuse by state legislators for centuries. I mean, the reality is, you know, there have been innumerable attacks on women generally within the history of our nation. There have been attacks on gay and lesbian people and trans people and, you know, on contraception. All of that has a history of state legislative animosity, and I don't think that can be the test, because if it is, our Constitution can never evolve to changing times.
And it seems to me that by that logic, the court's own decision in, let's say, Hobby Lobby would be invalid, right? Because if I understand correctly, certainly the Constitution doesn't say anything explicit about the rights of employers to withhold or deny specific forms of medical coverage or what have you. So it seems to me they're selectively applying a logic in order to undermine, as you say, you know, countless decades of evolution of our understanding of constitutional freedom. Is that correct?
I think so. And I think, well, for two reasons. One is, what's clear to me is that the court, the Alito opinion, I don't want to say the court yet, but the Alito opinion totally ignores the effect of its ruling. In all of those 98 pages, there's never a recognition that when you ban abortion, you hurt not only women's ability to make important decisions about their lives, but you jeopardize their health, but in significant ways. And, you know, let's be clear here. If this becomes law, I won't even say if, when it becomes law, this opinion will permit states to ban abortion in the most extreme circumstances. And 25 states at least will do so. And that means that about 40 million women of childbearing age will be affected. That's the number that live in these states that will ban abortion. And hundreds of thousands of them facing unintended pregnancies will be jeopardized. They'll have to travel. They will have to obtain medication abortion, which is a very safe way of having an abortion, but they'll have to obtain the pills through a gray or a black market. They have to, as a result, they will risk prosecution for doing so. Their friends and family may be at risk because some of these laws, like Texas, says the women can't even get help if they're self-managing care. So, you know, there's huge ramifications, and even women who have wanted pregnancies will suffer significantly because in some instances, when a woman's health is severely endangered at the end of a pregnancy or kind of in the middle of a pregnancy, she may need to terminate that pregnancy. There will be no providers. And as we've seen in Ireland when women died as a result of bans, and as we saw just in the story of the woman with the ectopic pregnancy in Texas who had to travel to Oklahoma to get care. This is bad for women's health, and it's bad for women's ability to make decisions that are important in their lives.
And it seems to me that, as I mentioned earlier, of course, poorer women, Black and brown women, they're going to be more vulnerable in this situation because they won't have the same kinds of options. It seems like such an extreme position for them to take. And I'll confess to a little bit of naivete there. One of the, I'm a little shocked. One of the theories that's been floated is, you said, this is basically a done deal, is the impression I'm getting from you. One of the theories that I've seen floated is that, John Roberts, Chief Justice Roberts, will come in at the last minute and broker a deal that basically says the 15-week abortion floor that is now, being reviewed, that we'll set it there, that will be seen as a compromise position. The final ruling won't be as extreme, but it sounds like you're pretty convinced this is it. This is what we're going to, and I'm not saying that's a good outcome, but
let's be clear here. If Chief Justice Roberts had the power to do that, he would be writing the opinion, not Alito.
Right.
Okay. He's the sixth vote. You only need 5. I say this all the time. Winning in the Supreme Court is a lot like Sesame Street. You got to learn to count.
Right.
The only number that matters is 5. And he's number 6. So I don't think that is correct. And I don't let me just say, I don't really see an advantage on either side for releasing this document. I just don't. I've thought about this a lot. I don't see what the game is. It turns out, I don't know if your listeners know this, but Roe was leaked prior to its issuance. But in those days, it was leaked to Time Magazine, and Time Magazine agreed to hold it and not make it public until the court released their document. There was a little problem with timing, so it came out a couple of hours before the court actually released the case. But it's not the first time it's happened, even on this issue. But I just don't see the advantage. I mean, if you're on in the minority, like the women on this court and Justice Breyer, you want the opportunity to take on the opinion and get your dissenting views made public. And we're not going to spend 2 weeks talking about Alito without any pushback from other justices. So I don't see any advantage for their side to release this document. The only advantage I can see is, obviously for somebody trying to change minds. I just don't see that happening on this court. If anything, maybe the right is wanting to release it in dribs and drabs so that they take the impact of it out of, all one day, all over the world one day. I'm not sure that really works. I mean, you and I are talking about it now, and we'll talk about it once it's issued.
Right.
So I just, I don't get it. And frankly, the only thing I do get is that the Republicans would rather talk about the leak than they would about the substance of the opinion. And that's true for a lot lot of issues.
Right. And of course they would, since the public is against them largely on the opinion itself. I guess, the issue that comes up for a lot of us in this is many of us, attorneys and non-attorneys alike, have watched with dismay at the aggressive politicization of the judiciary by, right-wing ideologues like the ones on the court, who apparently, and I'll express my opinion, had, and it should be no surprise, had no compunction about lying about their views about Roe v. Wade to get confirmed and so on. And, this politicization it penetrates down the federal judiciary, as I understand it. And it seems to me a lot of people are saying today they're not only grieving and in shock for what this will do to 40 million women, but they are also wondering, what can we do to protect women's rights and to defend ourselves from an aggressive ideological judiciary that is, will likely extend this kind of approach to other areas of law as well. What do you?
Well, I'm with you. I mean, I think it denigrates the institutional integrity of the court. That is not a good thing in any society. We need a rule of law. We need a consistent rule of law. The law can't seem to change based on the willy-nilly politics of the individual justices who are there, and all of that is happening here. But I think we can do something, and particularly lawyers have skills here that are really helpful. And everybody else does as well. And the first and most important, well, there's two things we need to do. First, we need to take care of the women who are affected. That means helping the funds in red states that have banned abortion have the resources to get women to care and have them have access to care, and lawyers can represent women who are prosecuted for trying to obtain medication, abortion, etc. All of that help is critically needed. But equally important, if not more important in my view, is we have to turn this around politically. Our opponents have been working in the legislatures and in Congress for 50 years, and we've depended on the courts. So as I've said repeatedly, we got to quit hitting our head against that marble staircase. A new strategy is necessary, and the only strategy that works is gaining political power to make the change. That means, and this issue breaks down on party lines, okay? When Republicans control the legislatures, they vote to ban abortion. When Democrats control, they vote to provide support for women seeking these procedures. We need to have more democratically controlled legislatures and gubernatorial seats. Blue states got to stay blue, purple states got to turn blue, red states got to turn blue, and we got to make that happen. And there's no shortcut to that, okay? This doesn't happen in the next primary election. We can't just say we're going to work for our favorite candidate and make sure that happens tomorrow. It's got to be a concerted effort every election, twice a year, in every state in this country. And that means doing uncomfortable things. You know, liberals love to depend on the courts because it's easy. And they love to vote in presidential elections and not any others. And so we need to change that and make sure we are on the ground everywhere. And for those of your listeners who live in blue states, there's a whole lot you can do to work in elections in other places that don't have the luxury of having safe abortion where they live. You can make phone calls, you can write postcards, you can do texts, you can give money, you can organize your friends to do all of those things. And let me just say, organizing is fun. It's a social activity. You shouldn't dread this because it is an opportunity for you to get reinvested in our democracy. And that's what it will take to make change here.
Well, very well said. And organization is also human connection, right? Which is something we all need. So organize, organize, organize. And Kathryn Kolbert, thank you so much for your work in this area. Again, Kathryn Kolbert is an organizational leader, an attorney, and the co-author of the book, Controlling Women, What We Must Do Now to Save Reproductive Freedom. I hope at some point you'll come back and talk about that book too. But thank you so much for your great work, and thank you for coming on the program.
All right. Thank you, Richard. Nice to be here.
And we'll be right back after this. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.